The smell of sizzling batter drifted through the tiny kitchen, warm and sweet like a promise trying to hold on. Thomas Reynolds flipped the pancake with practiced ease, careful not to wake the sleeping grief that had taken permanent residence in the corners of his chest. Across the room, Emma sat cross-legged at the table, her elbows propped up as she colored in a half-finished picture of a unicorn flying through stars. She hummed softly, off-key and innocent, the sound both grounding and unbearable. He glanced over his shoulder and smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You want blueberries or chocolate chips?" Emma didn't look up. "Both," Thomas chuckled, grabbing the tiny containers from the counter. "Living dangerously, huh?" She nodded solemnly, as if making important life decisions from the height of 7 years old. "It's a special day." His hand paused over the bowl. "Yeah," he said softly. "It is." He didn't tell her why. He didn't tell her that in 3 hours. They'd be sitting in a courtroom filled with polished shoes and legal jargon, where her future would be dissected by people who didn't know her favorite bedtime story or how she refused to sleep without her worn-out stuffed rabbit named Mr. Whiskers. He couldn't tell her that today. A stranger in a robe would decide whether they'd be eating pancakes together tomorrow or not. Instead, he served her a plate stacked high, topped with both blueberries and chocolate chips, and slid into the seat across from her. She beamed at him. He forced another smile. "Daddy," she asked around a bite, "do judges wear capes?" He laughed, genuinely this time. "Not usually, just robes, like really boring superheroes." Emma considered that, eyes narrowing. "Maybe you could be a judge. You're not boring." His heart clenched. "I don't think I'd be very good at telling people what to do." She giggled. "You tell me what to do all the time." Kirk reached over and ruffled her hair. "That's different. I'm your dad." And as he watched her eat, cheeks full, eyes bright, he held on to the image, memorizing it, because deep down, some part of him already knew this might be the last morning like this for a long, long time. The courtroom was cold. Too cold, Eleanor Mitchell thought, as she adjusted the collar of her robe and glanced down at the thick file in front of her. Case 42781. Reynolds versus Reynolds. Custody hearing. She'd read the briefs last night after dinner, long after the city lights had flickered on and the silence of her apartment had settled in like a familiar weight. She had stayed up late reviewing every affidavit, every financial statement, every school attendance record, as if reading it enough times might offer clarity where emotion threatened to cloud judgment. Now, seated high above the room in her elevated chair, Eleanor kept her expression still. Unreadable, a gavel rested within reach, but she didn't touch it. Her fingers remained laced in front of her, her eyes drifting between the two parents seated across from one another at their respective tables. The mother, Sarah Reynolds, sat with her attorney, polished and confident in her tailored suit. She glanced occasionally at the judge, at ease with the quiet power of the court. Her posture was perfect, her tone careful. Beside her sat a binder, thick with documentation. Thomas Reynolds, on the other hand, sat alone. His suit jacket didn't quite fit, the sleeves a touch too short, and the tie around his neck looked borrowed or forgotten until the last minute. But his eyes, Eleanor noticed, never left the floor except when they flicked toward the gallery where Emma's school counselor waited to speak on his behalf. The weariness in his face wasn't rehearsed, it was lived in as the arguments began. Eleanor took notes in tight, efficient strokes. The mother's lawyer spoke first, citing missed school days, a modest income, an unstable schedule, facts. He called them. Then came Thomas's voice, steady but strained, as he described bedtime routines, pancakes on Saturdays, the nights spent helping Emma through fevers with nothing but wet towels and hope. Eleanor didn't blink. She couldn't afford to. Fairness had no room for feeling, but when Thomas looked up, just once, and locked eyes with her for the briefest moment, something inside her cracked. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't desperate. He was just there, present, honest, human. And it was that humanity she'd have to ignore when she made her ruling, because justice didn't care who tucked the child in at night, only who could afford to. The air in the courtroom thickened as Sarah's lawyer stood, straightening his already perfect tie like he was preparing for a performance rather than a cross-examination. Richard Barnes was a man built for courtroom drama, immaculately dressed and armed with a kind of calm confidence that came from years of tearing people apart with a smile. He approached the witness stand slowly, the click of his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor like punctuation marks. Thomas sat there, upright but visibly tense, hands clasped tightly in his lap. His tie had come slightly loose since this morning. The courtroom lighting seemed harsher now, catching on the dark circles under his eyes and the wrinkle forming between his brows. "Mr. Reynolds," Barnes began, voice smooth, practiced. "Would you consider yourself financially stable?" Thomas's mouth opened, closed. "I do the best I can." Barnes tilted his head. "That wasn't the question." A pause. "No," Thomas admitted. "Not always. But Emma's never gone without. But she has missed school days. Correct?" Barnes cut in, flipping through his file theatrically. "Records show 5 absences in the last 2 months. Thomas's jaw tightened. "She had the flu. I stayed home with her." "Because you couldn't afford childcare. Correct?" "I wanted to be there for her." "Yes or no, Mr. Reynolds?" Thomas's silence was answer enough, from her seat on the bench. Judge Eleanor Mitchell remained expressionless, but her eyes never left Thomas. She was listening, not just to the words, but to what was being said between them. Barnes moved in closer, sensing momentum. "You live in a 1-bedroom apartment over a mechanic shop. Your work hours are unpredictable. You bring Emma to the garage during late shifts sometimes, don't you?" Thomas hesitated. "Only when I have no other choice. Is that what you'd call a stable environment for a child?" Thomas's eyes darkened. "She's loved. That's always been enough." Barnes offered a thin, rehearsed smile. "Unfortunately, Mr. Reynolds, the court doesn't weigh love on a financial scale." Thomas looked over at Eleanor then, for just a second, not to beg, not to plead, just to be seen for what he was, a father doing everything he could with what little he had. But this courtroom didn't run on heart. It ran on evidence. And in that moment, Thomas could feel the verdict slipping through his fingers, long before it was ever spoken. The courtroom was silent, unnaturally so, as Judge Eleanor Mitchell adjusted her robe and cleared her throat. The final pages of her ruling rested on the bench before her, the ink still fresh, though the decision had been written in her mind long before this moment. Procedure, precedent, welfare. All the words that were supposed to guide justice now felt like thin excuses for something heavier. Thomas sat at the respondent's table, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly together, as if holding them still could hold his world together too. Sarah sat across from him, composed, her lawyer whispering something into her ear. She nodded once, but her eyes never left the judge. Eleanor looked out across the room, her gaze lingering for a heartbeat longer than it should have on Thomas. "This court," she began, her voice even, formal, cold in ways that hurt her more than she would ever admit, "finds that in the best interest of the child, Emma Reynolds, primary physical custody will be granted to the petitioner. Sarah Reynolds." Thomas didn't move. He didn't blink. The words crashed over him like a wave, but his body stayed frozen, numb. Eleanor continued speaking, outlining visitation schedules, weekend rights, and counseling requirements. But Thomas barely heard a word, his ears filled with a sound he couldn't place at first, a kind of roaring silence, louder than any cry. Then, just as she was finishing, movement to his right caught his eye. Emma! She had slipped free from her mother's grasp and was running, small arms reaching out, face streaked with tears. "Daddy!" Thomas caught her, lifting her into his arms before anyone could stop her. She clung to him, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. "I don't want to go," she whispered. Thomas held her tighter, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other gripping her small frame like she might vanish if he let go. His throat burned. He couldn't speak. Across the bench, Eleanor's composure fractured, her jaw tensed, and for a brief moment, her eyes welled with something dangerously close to tears. She looked down. The bailiff stepped forward. Hesitant, Thomas kissed the top of Emma's head. "Be brave. Okay, I'm right here. Always." And when he finally let her go, it felt like tearing his own heart out by the roots. As the doors closed behind them and the echo of Emma's cries faded down the hall, Judge Eleanor Mitchell remained still, but her hands, hidden beneath the bench, were trembling. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, sealing the judge's chambers in a thick, suffocating silence. Eleanor Mitchell stood motionless in the center of the room, still clad in her black robe, though it now felt less like a uniform and more like a shroud. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, the only sound in a space that had once felt like control and now felt like confinement. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Walking to her desk, she sat down slowly, deliberately, as if every movement required careful thought. The legal file sat in front of her, the Reynolds case neatly closed, as though the weight of what had just happened could be contained by a folder and a paperclip. She stared at it without really seeing, her eyes unfocused, her thoughts spiraling. Emma's face. It hovered in her mind with devastating clarity the moment the little girl broke free. Those arms outstretched, the panic in her voice. Daddy. Not defiance, not confusion. Pure instinct. That cry had cracked something deep in Eleanor's chest, something she'd buried years ago beneath layers of statutes, procedures, and robes. She stood abruptly, pacing to the bookshelf where rows of legal volumes lined the wall, texts she once devoured, the very foundation of her beliefs. She ran her fingers along their spines. Pausing at a worn copy of Family Law and Custody Guidelines, her hand dropped away. The law was supposed to protect the vulnerable. That's why she'd entered it. But today it had failed. You did what was right, she told herself. You followed protocol. You considered the facts. You made a fair ruling. And yet, no ruling had ever left her feeling like this. She pressed her palms against the desk, trying to steady herself, but her shoulders shook anyway. A sound escaped her small at first, then fuller, more raw. It wasn't quite a sob, not yet, but it was coming. When the tears finally fell, there was no one there to see them. No jury, no gallery, no gavel to strike order, just Eleanor, alone behind the robe, grieving a choice she was trained to make, but couldn't live with. The scent of burnt coffee lingered in the break room, bitter and stale, but Eleanor barely noticed as she sat at the small round table, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug that hadn't seen fresh ground since morning. Across from her, Judge Martha Collins leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, watching Eleanor with quiet concern. "You look like hell," Martha said, not unkindly. Eleanor offered a tired smile, the kind that didn't ask for comfort. "That's because I feel like hell." Martha took a sip from her own mug, waiting. She knew better than to push. Eleanor Mitchell didn't unravel easily, but today something was different. There was a fraying at the edges, a weight in her eyes she wasn't hiding. "It was the Reynolds case," Eleanor finally said, her voice low. "Custody hearing. I ruled in favor of the mother." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Problem." Eleanor stared down into her coffee as if it might offer an answer she'd missed. "No, not legally." Everything was by the book. Stable income, better housing, reliable child care, all the check boxes. "But," Martha prompted. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the mug. "But it didn't feel right." The silence stretched. "I watched that little girl cling to her father like he was the only solid thing left in her world." Eleanor continued, her voice growing more strained. "And when I ruled against him, the way she cried, the way he held her, like he was breaking and trying not to show it." She stopped, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. "I've always believed in the law," she said finally. That if I stuck to the facts and kept emotion out of it, I could protect people, do good, but for the first time, I'm not sure I made the right call. Martha nodded slowly, setting her mug down. The law isn't perfect. Eleanor, it's not built for feelings. That's the burden we carry. But what if this time, Eleanor whispered, what if the law got it wrong? Martha didn't answer, because sometimes silence is the only thing honest enough to hold the weight of a judge's doubt. The late afternoon sun spilled gold across Westfield Park, casting long shadows between the trees and warming the cool spring air. Families clustered on picnic blankets. Children darted through the playground, their laughter floating above the rustle of leaves. It was a world moving on. Unaware of heartbreak tucked between its ordinary moments, Eleanor Mitchell hadn't meant to stop. She had just finished a mediation downtown and decided to walk instead of heading straight home. Her heels clicked softly along the stone path, the rhythmic sound offering a thin distraction from the thoughts she couldn't shake. Then she saw him. Thomas Reynolds sat on a weather-worn bench beneath a sprawling oak, alone. His posture was still but not relaxed, arms resting on his thighs, head slightly bowed. In his hands, crumpled but carefully held, was a piece of paper, not a file, not a legal document, a child's drawing. Eleanor slowed instinctively, her breath catching. It was Emma's. She recognized the shaky handwriting from the file, the bright swirls of marker, a lopsided heart and stick figures labeled me and Daddy. Thomas stared at it like it was the last good thing he had left in the world. She didn't mean to watch him. She should have kept walking, but her feet refused. There was something about the way he sat, utterly still in the middle of all that motion, that struck her not angry, not bitter, just quiet. A man absorbing loss in the only place he could without falling apart. She moved closer before she realized she was doing it. He looked up as she approached, their eyes locking. Recognition flickered. His expression didn't harden, didn't change into something polite or accusatory. He simply saw her. I didn't think I'd see you here, she said, voice soft, unsure. Thomas gave a half shrug. Didn't plan on it, just needed somewhere to breathe. She nodded slowly, glancing down at the drawing. That's hers, isn't it? He looked back at the paper, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. More ache than warmth. She drew it the night before court. Told me to keep it with me so I wouldn't forget her. Eleanor felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. I don't think you ever could, she whispered. Thomas didn't answer. He didn't have to. Eleanor hesitated at the edge of the bench, her shadow falling long across the grass. Thomas didn't move, didn't look up again. He just sat there, the child's drawing still clutched in his hands, the wind teasing the edges like it wanted to carry it away. She could have walked past, should have, but the silence between them felt fuller than words, like something waiting to be broken gently, not ignored. Mind if I sit, she asked, voice quieter than before. He glanced over, then nodded once. Sure. The bench creaked under her as she settled beside him, the space between them narrow but loaded. She didn't wear her robe here, didn't carry her gavel. Here, she was just Eleanor, and he was just a man trying not to fall apart in public. I don't usually come here, she offered. Me either. He replied, I used to bring Emma sometimes. She liked the ducks. Eleanor nodded, her eyes drifting toward the small pond in the distance. A few ducks bobbed near the edge, trailing ripples behind them. I almost forgot how loud the world can be when you're quiet, Thomas said. Eleanor gave a dry chuckle. Yeah, funny how that works. They sat in silence for a beat, letting the sounds of children laughing and birds overhead fill the space. Then Eleanor said, carefully, I've been thinking about you and Emma. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was low, tired. You don't have to say anything. I get it. You did your job. I know I did, she said, but that doesn't mean it didn't hurt. Thomas looked at her, then really looked, and something shifted in his face. Not forgiveness, not anger, just recognition of pain, of weight carried alone. I miss her, he said simply. Eleanor's throat tightened. I know. She drew that picture for me like it was armor, he said, unfolding the crinkled paper. Told me to be brave. I couldn't tell her I was scared, he whispered. Eleanor stared at the drawing. She's lucky to have someone who loves her that deeply. She deserves better, he whispered. No, Eleanor said, barely louder than the wind. She deserves you. And in that moment, there were no titles, no bench between them, just two people sitting side by side in the aftermath of something broken, finally speaking the truth. The mornings were the worst. The sun still rose like nothing had changed, spilling light across the faded carpet of Thomas's apartment. But everything was different now. Emma's bed sat empty in the corner, sheets rumpled but untouched. Her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Whiskers, slumped against the pillow like it had given up waiting for her to come back. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands, untouched. The silence pressed in, heavier with each day. No sleepy footsteps, no cereal spilled on the floor, no giggles as she tried to brush her own hair and got it hopelessly tangled. It had been 4 days since the hearing, 4 days since her small hand slipped from his. He tried to stay busy, took on every repair job at the garage, worked late into the night, let the grime and the clang of tools drown out the ache in his chest. But when he finally came home, the quiet was unbearable. And every night, like a film loop he couldn't turn off, he replayed the park. Eleanor, her unexpected appearance had unsettled something in him. Not anger, not even confusion, just surprise. She had looked so different without the robe, human, and when she'd sat beside him, he hadn't seen a judge. He'd seen a woman carrying something heavy. She had said Emma deserved him. The words stuck with him, echoing louder than anything the lawyers had said in court. They didn't fix anything, didn't bring Emma back, but they settled in the hollow space where hope used to live. Still, he didn't know what to make of it, why she came, why she cared. He reached into his wallet and pulled out Emma's drawing. It was creased now, the ink faded at the corners, but her smiling stick figure still held his hand, with a red crayon heart drawn between them. He closed his eyes. Be brave, Daddy. She had told him. He wasn't sure he could be. Not yet. But her voice stayed with him. And now, so did Eleanor's. The bell above the garage door chimed with a soft ding. Half lost beneath the clatter of tools and the low rumble of an engine, in need of coaxing back to life. Thomas wiped his hands on a grease-streaked rag, his back to the front, expecting a delivery or maybe a last-minute customer before closing. Be right with you, he called, voice weary from a long shift. When he turned, he froze. Eleanor Mitchell stood just inside the doorway, hair swept into a low knot, sleeves rolled up on a cream blouse already dusted with road grit. She didn't look like a judge today. She looked like someone who'd been driving too fast, thinking too much, and landed exactly where she hadn't planned. Flat tire, she said, lifting a brow slightly. Front right. I think I hit a curb, or maybe karma. Thomas blinked, then managed a half smile. You know most people don't dress this nicely for a breakdown. Eleanor shrugged. Old habits. He gestured to the open bay. Pull her in. Let's take a look. A few minutes later, the car was up on the jack, and Thomas was crouched beside it, inspecting the tire. Eleanor stood nearby, arms folded, eyes watching him in that calm, careful way she always had. But there was something different now, something softer beneath the composed surface. I didn't come here just for the tire, she said after a beat. Thomas didn't look up. No, she shook her head slowly. I could have gone anywhere. I know that sounds ridiculous. He finished tightening a lug nut before standing, wiping his hands again. So why here? Eleanor looked at him, eyes searching. I needed to see if you were okay. Thomas stared at her, unsure how to answer. I'm getting by. Getting by doesn't look like sleeping 3 hours a night and living on black coffee. He gave a dry laugh. Then I guess I'm doing great. She smiled faintly. You don't have to talk. I just wanted to show up. Thomas studied her for a long moment, surprised by the honesty in her face. No courtroom, no bench, just two people who had somehow become tethered by the same loss. "Thanks for coming," he said at last. She nodded. "Thanks for fixing the tire." Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to, not yet. The rhythmic hiss of the air compressor filled the garage, blending with the steady clink of metal and the low hum of a late afternoon breeze. Thomas crouched beside Eleanor's car, tightening bolts and checking pressure. But his movements were slower than usual, not out of fatigue, though it had been a long week. But because of her, Eleanor stood a few feet away, leaning against the garage wall. Her arms relaxed now, fingers no longer knotted together in front of her, like she was testifying. The hard edges she wore in the courtroom had softened, her voice warmer, her gaze more open. "I used to think I was helping people," she said quietly, watching him work. "Every ruling, every line of the law, I believed it all meant something, that it made a difference." Thomas didn't look up. "What changed?" She hesitated. "You did." He paused, glanced at her, eyes narrowing just slightly in surprise. "I've read hundreds of case files," she continued, "but none of them stayed with me like yours did. The way Emma looked at you, the way you looked at her. I don't know if I've ever seen a bond like that before." Thomas stood, brushing his hands on his jeans. "And still I lost her." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I know." For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of the jack as Thomas lowered the car back to the ground. "I didn't come here for pity," he said. "I know," she replied. He crossed his arms, studying her. "So why did you come?" Eleanor exhaled, then smiled, not polished, not practiced, but real. "Because I didn't want you to think I forgot about you, or her, or what that decision cost." Thomas leaned back against the workbench, rubbing his jaw. "Most people don't care once the case is closed." "I'm not most people," she said softly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, quiet but undeniable. Not verdicts, not rules. Just two people standing in the wreckage of something bigger than either of them, trying to make sense of the pieces. Thomas nodded toward the car. "You're good to go. Tires patched." Eleanor smiled again, this time with something lingering behind it. "Thanks, Thomas." "Anytime," he said, and meant it. The light outside the garage had begun to fade, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Most of the town had already closed up shop for the night, but neither Thomas nor Eleanor seemed in a hurry to move. They sat on two upturned milk crates just outside the bay doors, sipping from mismatched coffee cups and watching the slow crawl of twilight settle over the street. It was Eleanor who broke the silence first. "I was married once," she said, her voice calm but distant. "His name was Daniel. We were together for 7 years. He was a surgeon. Brilliant. Driven. We thought we had it all figured out." Thomas looked over at her, eyebrows raised just slightly. He hadn't expected that. She didn't wear her past the way he did, worn down at the edges, stitched together by circumstance. "What happened?" he asked gently. Eleanor stared out at the sky, its soft blue deepening into indigo. "We lost a baby. 2nd trimester. A girl." She paused. "And we never really recovered after that." Thomas didn't speak, just listened. It was like everything cracked open. He buried himself in work. I buried myself in the law. We stopped talking about her. Then we stopped talking about anything. She turned to face him, eyes steady. "That's when I decided to become a judge. I thought if I couldn't protect my own, maybe I could protect someone else's." Thomas sat with that for a long moment, nodding slowly. "You still wear your ring?" he asked, noticing the thin gold band on her right hand. Eleanor glanced down at her hand. "No, this one's not from him. It's my mother's. She raised me by herself after my dad left. Never had much, but she gave me everything that mattered." A breeze passed through, lifting strands of her hair. Thomas watched her tuck them behind her ear, her composure briefly slipping into something more vulnerable. "You've lost things too," she said, not as a question. He nodded. "Yeah, but I never thought I'd lose Emma. Not like this." Eleanor met his gaze. "I don't think you've lost her, Thomas. I think the world just got it wrong." And in the quiet that followed, their lives, once strangers, felt suddenly, irrevocably parallel. The courthouse hallway echoed with the sharp clicks of heels and the low murmur of conversations behind closed doors. Eleanor Mitchell walked briskly, her file tucked tight beneath her arm, face composed as always. But inside her thoughts were unraveling, thread by thread. She hadn't meant to overhear. She hadn't been looking for anything. But she'd paused outside the clerk's office just long enough to catch the voice of a family services officer chatting with an attorney. It was Emma's name that froze her in place. "Yeah, I checked in last week. Kid's been with a nanny 4 nights in a row. Mom's been flying to Boston for work again." Eleanor's heart dropped. "Sarah Reynolds?" the attorney asked. "Yep, she's barely around. The house is spotless, sure, and the fridge is full. But that girl, she looks like she's waiting for someone to come home, and she knows it's not the sitter." Eleanor moved away before they noticed her. Down the corridor, into her chambers. She closed the door behind her with a click that sounded louder than it should have. She stood still for a moment, just breathing. This wasn't in the testimony. Sarah had presented herself as a full-time, hands-on parent with a stable schedule and home environment. The nanny had been framed as occasional support, reliable, harmless, professional. But 4 nights a week, Eleanor sat down slowly, her hands trembling just slightly as she opened the Reynolds file again. The ink was as neat as ever. The affidavits were all in order. But suddenly it all looked wrong. "I made a decision based on what I was given," she reminded herself. "I followed the rules." But the rules didn't include late-night flights and lonely dinners. The rules didn't see Emma waiting at a window for someone who wouldn't come. And what stung the most was knowing who had been there. Thomas. Every time. Until Eleanor's ruling severed that bond like it was just another line in a judgment. She leaned back in her chair, pressing her fingers to her temple. This wasn't just a legal error. It was a human one. And it was hers. For the first time in her career. Judge Eleanor Mitchell didn't just regret the ruling. She regretted following the law instead of her heart. The glow from Eleanor's computer screen cast pale light across her otherwise dark office. Outside her window. The city had quieted, the hum of traffic reduced to an occasional whisper beneath the stillness of night. The courthouse was empty now, save for a few janitors finishing their rounds and the occasional creak of the old building settling into silence. She stared at the cursor blinking on the legal form's homepage. It was the 3rd time she had typed out her question, and the 3rd time she had deleted it. Can a custody case be reopened if new information comes to light about the custodial parent's absence? It sounded innocent, academic, like a student asking for clarification. But Eleanor knew the weight behind it. She knew the unspoken name at the center of it all. Emma Reynolds. And she knew that if anyone traced this back to her, her entire career would be on the line. Judges didn't question their rulings, at least not publicly. And certainly not online at midnight under a pseudonym. Still, she typed it again. Slightly differently this time, just enough to feel one step removed. If significant information is withheld during a custody trial, specifically regarding the custodial parent's prolonged absences, is there legal precedent to revisit the ruling? She hesitated over the submit button. Every fiber of her training told her to stop, to close the laptop, to forget the park bench and Thomas's quiet heartbreak, to forget Emma's drawing and the way her small voice echoed. "I don't want to go," but her hand clicked the mouse anyway. The screen refreshed. The post was live. She leaned back, her heart pounding harder than it had during any verdict she'd ever delivered. She wasn't supposed to care like this. Not this deeply, not enough to risk everything she'd built. The law demanded distance, impartiality, but she wasn't impartial anymore. Not when she knew she might have made a mistake that cost a little girl her father. She stared at the screen, waiting for a response, for direction, for anything to justify what she already knew in her gut. There were lines judges shouldn't cross, but sometimes doing nothing felt like the greater crime. The community center's visitation room was painted in soft, cheery pastels, but nothing about it felt warm. The chairs were too stiff, the fluorescent lights too bright, and the watchful eyes of the court-appointed monitor in the corner made every movement feel like it might be cataloged and filed away. Thomas sat at the small round table, his hands folded around a small wooden box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a faded ribbon. He stared at the clock. 4 minutes past 2. They were late. Then the door opened. Emma entered slowly, her tiny hand in the grip of a stranger, a young woman with a clipboard and a polite, distant smile. "There she is," Thomas said, standing up, heart thudding like it hadn't in weeks. Emma's face lit up. She broke away from the aide, rushing forward to hug him tight. "Daddy!" He knelt to meet her, arms wrapping around her small frame, like he could somehow protect her from everything. Even here, her hair smelled like strawberries, and her cheeks were rosy from the cold outside. "Happy birthday, baby girl," he whispered into her hair. She pulled back, beaming. "I'm 8 now. That's almost a grown-up." Thomas chuckled. "Almost." They sat together, and he reached for the small package on the table. "I made you something," he said, pushing it gently toward her. Emma untied the ribbon carefully, the way he taught her. Inside was a small hand-carved music box, polished smooth, the lid engraved with stars and a little moon. When she opened it, a soft tinkling melody played a lullaby he used to hum when she couldn't sleep. Her eyes widened. "You made this," he nodded. "Every piece. Took me a while. Thought maybe you'd want something that sounded like home." Emma turned the crank again, mesmerized. "It does." Thomas swallowed the lump rising in his throat. The aide coughed gently, glancing at her watch. 5 more minutes. Already. Emma hugged him again, tighter this time. "Can I come home soon? Daddy?" He didn't answer right away, just held her, letting the music play, and whispered, "I'm trying, sweetheart. I'm trying every day." The envelope was small, slightly wrinkled, and tucked between stacks of official documents on Eleanor's desk. No return address, no markings, just her name in uneven, looping handwriting across the front, Judge Mitchell. She almost didn't open it right away. It had been a long morning of back-to-back hearings and too much coffee, and she assumed it was another overlooked note from a clerk or an administrative slip, but something about the handwriting so imperfect, so young made her pause. She unfolded the letter carefully. The paper was lined, like it came from a second-grade notebook. The crayon drawings around the border were unmistakable, a big heart in the corner. A figure with long hair wearing a robe. Another figure with messy brown hair and big arms holding a child. Eleanor's throat tightened before she even read the first word. "Dear Judge Mitchell, my name is Emma Reynolds, and I'm 8 now. I just had my birthday. My dad made me a music box, and it sounds like stars. I love it. I know you made the choice for me to live with Mom. I think maybe you thought it was best. But I really miss my dad a lot. He used to make pancakes on Saturdays and sing when I was scared. He holds my hand when I have bad dreams. I like my mom's house, but she's gone a lot, and the lady who stays with me is nice, but she doesn't smell like oil and cinnamon the way Daddy does. Sometimes I cry and try not to let her see. I don't want to make trouble. I just want to see my daddy more. Please, he's the only one who never lies to me. Thank you for reading this. I hope you're having a nice day. Love. Emma." Eleanor sat back in her chair, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. She read the letter again, and then again. Each line dug deeper than the last, not just because of the words, but because of the voice. Clear, honest, without bitterness or manipulation. Just a little girl asking for something no law book could measure. She had followed the law, but now the law was staring her in the face, in crayon and pencil and heartbreak, and it was asking the one question she'd been trying to avoid. What if you were wrong? The letter lay flat on Eleanor's desk, its creases smoothed from how many times she had unfolded and refolded it. The childish handwriting danced across the page in shaky lines, some words pressed hard into the paper, like Emma had wanted to make sure they wouldn't be missed. Eleanor's fingers hovered above the edge for a long moment before she picked it up again. "He's the only one who never lies to me." That line hit the hardest. She read the letter once more, this time aloud, her voice quiet in the stillness of her chambers. Each sentence landed like a stone in her chest, small, steady, relentless. She imagined Emma sitting at a kitchen table, tongue between her teeth, carefully sounding out each word as she wrote. No lawyer, no argument, just truth. Eleanor didn't cry, not quite, but her throat ached with the pressure of what she was holding back. When the last word slipped past her lips, she set the letter down gently, as though afraid of hurting it. Outside, the courthouse moved on, judges handing down decisions, clerks stamping files, the system spinning forward with all the indifference of a well-oiled machine. But inside this room, time had slowed to a crawl. Eleanor reached for the small brass key in her top drawer and opened the narrow filing cabinet beside her desk. She slipped the letter into a plain envelope, sealed it with shaking hands, and tucked it in the back corner of the drawer, behind the files, behind the records. Somewhere it wouldn't be found, somewhere safe. Then she locked it. But the truth was, it didn't matter where she put the letter. It was already inside her. Every word, every crayon-drawn heart, every quiet plea from a little girl who wasn't supposed to have to ask to see the one person who made her feel whole. Eleanor closed her eyes, pressing her fingers against her temples. She had followed the law. She had done everything by the book. And yet, somehow, Emma's letter weighed more than the entire case file ever had. The doorbell rang just as Eleanor was pulling the lasagna from the oven, the smell of roasted garlic and basil thick in the air. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, nerves humming beneath her calm exterior. It was just dinner, a simple, quiet meal, nothing formal, nothing improper. She repeated the words in her head like a defense, but when she opened the door and saw Thomas standing there, jeans still stained from the shop, hair slightly tousled, a bottle of wine in one hand and a hesitant smile on his face, every line she'd drawn in her mind blurred a little more. "Hope I'm not early," he said. Eleanor shook her head. "No, you're right on time." He stepped inside slowly, taking in the space. Her apartment was modern but lived in, walls lined with books instead of artwork, a faint record playing in the background, jazz, low and steady. "Didn't expect you to be the cooking type," he said, eyeing the table already set for two. Eleanor shrugged a little too casually. "I said we'd talk strategy. Figured we might as well eat." Right, he said, though something in his tone hinted he knew better. They sat across from each other, steam rising from their plates, the clink of silverware filling the silence for the first few minutes. She had notes beside her plate, legal printouts, custody case precedents, outlines of procedural motions, untouched. "I've been thinking about the letter," she said finally. Thomas looked up, brow furrowing. "You read it?" She nodded. "I don't know who sent it, but it found me." He set down his fork. "That was Emma, her words." Eleanor didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared at her glass of wine, swirling it slowly. "It said more than a dozen depositions ever could." Thomas watched her closely. "So what happens now?" "That's complicated," she said, her voice softer than before. "Legally, my hands are tied, but personally," she trailed off. "You care," he said, not as a question. She met his eyes. "I do." The room quieted, not awkwardly, but like something had shifted. The wine, the food, the pretense of strategy. Thomas smiled faintly. "This doesn't feel like court anymore." Eleanor leaned back, her expression unreadable except in her eyes. "No," she said, "it doesn't." It started with laughter, quiet at first, hesitant. The kind that slips out unexpectedly when two people realize they don't have to pretend. Eleanor and Thomas sat on her balcony under a string of warm patio lights, the city glowing in the distance. A second bottle of wine between them. The air was cool but not cold, and the space between them had slowly, almost imperceptibly, begun to disappear. "I still can't believe you fixed your first engine with a paperclip and duct tape," Eleanor said, smiling wide, eyes glassy from the wine. Thomas chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Desperate times. It was either that or walk 20 miles with Emma on my shoulders in the middle of January." Eleanor leaned her head against the railing, her smile softening. "You always talk about her like she's still right beside you." "She is," he said simply. "Everywhere I go." The words hung in the air between them, heavy, true, and laced with something unspoken. Eleanor looked down, fiddling with the stem of her wineglass. "You know, I never thought I'd sit like this with you, after what the court did." He glanced at her, eyes narrowing gently. "You didn't do it to hurt me." "No," she said, "but I still did it." The wind stirred her hair, brushing it across her face. Thomas reached out instinctively, tucking it behind her ear. His fingers grazed her cheek, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The touch lingered. Too long to be innocent, too short to be decisive. "I should feel angry," he said, voice low. "But I don't know what that says about me." Eleanor's gaze didn't flinch. "Maybe it says you see me as more than the robe I wear." He looked away, down to the quiet street below. "That scares me a little." "Me too," she admitted. They sat in silence then. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because the things they wanted to say didn't belong in words. Not yet. Thomas stood after a while, slow and uncertain. "I should go." Eleanor followed him to the door, her fingers brushing his as she handed him his jacket. Their eyes met again, and something passed between them. Real, fragile, and far too dangerous. Neither said goodnight, because some things felt too close to goodbye. The silence in Judge Mitchell's chambers was broken only by the soft hum of her desktop computer and the subtle ticking of the old clock mounted on the wall behind her. She should have stopped. She knew that. But her hand hovered over the mouse, her eyes scanning the screen, heart pounding as she clicked open the file she had no business touching. Reynolds v. Reynolds. Custody review. Sealed addendum. Private visitation reports. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't permitted. The case was closed. The ruling final. But the moment Emma's letter arrived, everything changed. And now Eleanor needed to know, had she missed something? Had someone lied? Were there signs she failed to see? She read quickly, methodically. Notes from the child welfare officer, private counselor logs, schedules that contradicted sworn testimony. Pages of time-stamped records confirmed what she had overheard. In passing, Sarah Reynolds had not been the ever-present mother she claimed to be. A knock on her door snapped her out of the trance. She slammed the laptop shut, hard in her throat. "Come in." It was Robert Jeffries, the courthouse clerk, too sharp for his own good and too connected not to be dangerous. "Judge Mitchell," he said with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "just wanted to drop off these filings from Department 2. Thought you might want them before the docket hits tomorrow." Eleanor nodded, reaching for the folder. "Thank you, Robert." But Robert lingered. "Oh, before I forget, I passed by your office earlier and saw the system was still open under a sealed access level. Thought maybe it forgot to close out a session. You weren't in, so..." Eleanor froze. "I'm sure it's nothing," Robert added, voice sweet as syrup. "But you know how people talk when systems are accessed off hours, especially on closed custody rulings." Eleanor gave the faintest nod. "I'll take care of it." Robert smiled again. "Of course, just looking out." When the door clicked shut behind him, Eleanor let out a slow, shaky breath. It was done. She'd crossed a line, and now the whispers would start. She could already hear them in the walls. Why is Judge Mitchell reviewing a sealed custody case? Is she involved with the father she's slipping? And for the first time in her career, Eleanor realized the law might not be what brought her down. It might be her conscience. The envelope was thin, but the weight of it landed like a stone on Eleanor's desk. Her name was printed neatly across the front. Eleanor Mitchell, followed by a small crimson stamped seal from the Judicial Ethics Oversight Board. She stared at it for a long time before opening it, heart pounding a slow, methodical rhythm against her ribs. Inside, one page, one paragraph. Notice of formal review. An ethics complaint has been filed citing possible judicial misconduct regarding the unauthorized access of sealed case files. An inquiry will be conducted to determine breach of protocol. That was it. No names, no details, just a quiet, official dagger pointed directly at the foundation of her career. By noon, the whispers had turned into carefully constructed silence. Colleagues who usually lingered outside her chambers with coffee and case chatter now avoided eye contact. Judge Harris, who once sought her opinion on everything from juvenile law to weekend bourbon selections, offered only a curt nod in passing. Even her longtime clerk, Dana Myers, meticulous. Loyal, kept her words clipped and her tone distant. Eleanor moved through the courthouse like a ghost. She could feel the story curving around her in the air, filling the spaces between conversation. She accessed sealed records. It was the Reynolds case, wasn't it? You think she's compromised? She wanted to scream the truth that she hadn't done it for herself, that the girl in question, a little girl who trusted her dad more than anyone, deserved more than a system that favored income over connection, that sometimes justice wasn't black and white, but she knew the rules. She'd spent her whole life inside them. Now she was on the outside, that night, alone in her office, long after the halls had emptied. She stared at the sealed envelope again. Her name looked foreign now, detached from the person she used to be. Not a judge, not a symbol of impartiality, just a woman who had dared to care a little too much. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the garage as Eleanor stepped inside, coat damp and clinging to her shoulders. Thomas looked up from beneath the hood of a pickup, the clang of his wrench pausing as he took her in soaked, breathless, like she hadn't stopped moving since the world started tilting. He wiped his hands on a rag and met her halfway across the concrete floor. "You okay?" he asked. "No," she said, the word catching in her throat. "Not even close." She didn't wait for him to ask. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the letter. Emma's letter, now wrinkled at the corners from too many rereads. She handed it to him wordlessly, and he took it, confused, until he realized what it was. "You kept this?" he asked. "I read it almost every night," she said. "And then I opened your case file again. I looked through sealed reports. I broke protocol. Someone filed a complaint. They're opening an investigation." Thomas's expression hardened slightly. "Why would you risk that?" "Because I was wrong," she said, her voice trembling now. "When I ruled against you, I thought I was protecting Emma, that I was following the law. But all I did was take her from the one person who never stopped showing up." He stared at her, searching her face for something. Guilt, remorse, truth. It was all there. "I told myself I was being impartial," she continued, "but I wasn't. I was hiding behind rules, behind robes, because that's easier than listening to your gut and making a decision that doesn't look clean on paper." "And now," he asked quietly. Eleanor swallowed hard. "Now I'm losing everything I worked for. My reputation, maybe even my seat on the bench." Thomas looked at her for a long, heavy moment. "Why tell me all this?" She stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Because you deserve to know, and because I needed you to see me not as a judge, not as someone who hurt you, but as someone who wishes she hadn't." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of pain, of honesty, of something fragile growing in the wreckage. And when Thomas finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Now I see you. I just don't know what to do with that yet." Eleanor nodded. "I don't either. But she stayed, and so did he. The courthouse felt different this time. Thomas stood in the hallway outside Department 4 wearing the same suit he'd worn during the original hearing. It still didn't fit right too snug across the shoulders. A little short in the sleeves, but it didn't matter. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to fight again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Across from him, Eleanor stood in silence. A thick manila folder clutched to her chest. Her robe was gone. So was the authority that once cloaked her like armor. In its place stood something raw, braver. A woman who had stepped out of the safety of neutrality to stand beside the man she had once ruled against. "I pulled everything I could," she said quietly. "Flight logs, nanny statements, security footage, even time-stamped delivery reports from the house. It paints a pretty clear picture of how often Emma's mother isn't there." Thomas looked at her, unsure whether to thank her or question how surreal this all was. "You don't have to do this, you know?" "Yes, I do," she said, "because I helped take her from you. Now I want to help get her back." He nodded once, emotion flickering across his face. "You sure they'll even listen?" Eleanor glanced toward the courtroom doors. Maybe not, but you're not the man they painted in that first hearing, and I'm not the woman who sat behind that bench pretending she couldn't feel the truth in front of her." When the clerk called his name, Thomas took a deep breath and stepped forward. The petition was submitted formally, motion to reevaluate custody based on new evidence. Inside the chamber, a different judge presided, Judge Howard Blackwell, older, with gray temples and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He raised an eyebrow as he reviewed the names on the paperwork. "Miss Mitchell," he said slowly, recognizing her. "You're representing the father." Eleanor stepped forward. "Not as counsel, as a witness, and as someone with first-hand knowledge of how this child's current living situation was misrepresented in court." A hush fell over the room. This was more than unusual. It was unprecedented. Thomas watched her, heart pounding not from fear this time, but from something unfamiliar. Hope. Real. Fragile. Impossible hope. By the next morning, Eleanor's name was everywhere. Her photo, snapped as she walked out of the courthouse beside Thomas. Her coat wrapped tight against the wind, headlined the local paper, and splashed across news sites. Former Judge Mitchell breaks silence, supports father in custody battle she once ruled against. The article ran with an undercurrent of scandal, but the headline was only half the story. On social media, the reactions split clean down the middle. She crossed the line. Judges don't get to rewrite their decisions because of guilt. This is what integrity looks like: admitting you were wrong and doing something about it. She should be disbarred. She's the only one in that building with a soul. Talk shows picked it up. Podcasts dissected the ethics. Former colleagues refused comment, but their silence only fueled speculation. Eleanor had gone from being one of the most respected family court judges in the county to the center of a public storm, and Thomas, he stayed quiet. Not out of fear, but respect. He didn't want a media circus. He wanted Emma, and every headline, every camera flash, felt like a detour from what truly mattered. At the garage, customers whispered as they handed him keys. Some offered firm handshakes. Others offered wary glances. "Is it true?" one asked. "She's helping you now." Thomas just nodded. "Yeah, she is. At home." Eleanor turned off her phone and muted the television. The noise outside was too loud, too fast, and none of it matched the stillness inside her. She sat by her window, Emma's letter folded gently in her lap. They were calling her a fallen judge, but the truth was simpler. She had stopped hiding behind the title, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was doing something real. Whether the world saw her as brave or broken didn't matter anymore. Emma's voice still echoed in her mind, clear and unwavering. "I just want to see my daddy more." I know, that was the only opinion that mattered now. The hearing room was colder than any courtroom Eleanor had ever sat in, not because of the temperature, but because of the silence. Thick, expectant. edged with judgment that had nothing to do with laws or precedent. She stood at a small table in front of a panel of 3 judges she'd once worked beside, and one civilian representative from the Judicial Oversight Committee behind them. The seal of the state court loomed like a final verdict already cast. Her palms were dry, her back straight, but inside. Her chest tightened with each breath. "Judge Mitchell," the chairwoman began, voice clipped and cool. "You are here today under review for breach of judicial conduct, specifically the unauthorized access of sealed case materials related to Reynolds versus Reynolds, a matter in which you presided." Eleanor nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. You are no longer assigned to the case. You had no legal authority to reopen or intervene." "I understand." So, the chairwoman asked, fingers steepled. "Why did you—" Eleanor took a breath, not to steady herself, but to make sure she meant every word. "Because I made a mistake," she said. "Because I ruled by the book and ignored my instincts. I ignored what was obvious in front of me, that a child was being taken from the parent who knew her heart best." A flicker of surprise passed through the room. She didn't wait for them to respond. "I accessed the sealed records not for personal gain, not out of bias, but to correct what I now believe was a moral failure. The custodial parent misrepresented critical facts under oath. I was misled. I should have seen it then. I didn't. So I acted now." A pause. "I know I violated procedure. I know this may end my career. But if doing the right thing cost me the bench, I can live with that. What I couldn't live with was sitting back while a little girl lost the one person who never stopped fighting for her." Silence followed, long and deep. Eleanor didn't flinch under their gaze. She had already faced the most brutal judgment of all her own. The courtroom was filled with a different kind of silence, expectant, breathless. The kind that comes when even the walls seem to hold still. Thomas sat at the front, his hands folded tightly in his lap, shoulders tense beneath the worn fabric of his blazer. Eleanor was beside him, not at a podium, not in robes. Just there, present, unmoving. A quiet strength beside a man still holding on to hope. And then the door opened. Emma entered, holding the hand of a court-appointed child advocate. She wore a pale yellow dress with her hair in 2 uneven braids and a solemn look far too old for her 8 years. She didn't glance at the gallery. Her eyes scanned the room until they found her father. And then she smiled. Just a little. The judge. Different this time. A woman with kind eyes and a firm voice called for the room to settle. "Miss Reynolds," she said gently, "we understand you've asked to speak today. Are you sure?" Emma nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She climbed up into the witness seat with a small boost from the bailiff, her feet swinging above the floor. The judge gave her a soft smile. "Take your time." Emma looked down at the paper in her hands, but she didn't read it. She folded it instead, placed it in her lap, and looked straight ahead. "I love my mom," she began. "She's nice, and she buys me pretty dresses, and sometimes we have pancakes on Sunday." A beat. "But I miss my dad every day. He makes pancakes every Saturday, and he always remembers to put stars on my nightlight. He knows the words to my bedtime song. He knows when I'm faking a smile." The room didn't move, didn't breathe. "My mom's gone a lot. She works hard. But sometimes I feel alone, and I don't feel alone when I'm with Daddy." She glanced at the judge, her voice soft but certain. "I don't want to choose. I just want to be where it feels like home. And home is where Daddy is." No one spoke. No one had to. In that still, sacred moment, Emma's words carried more weight than any brief, any argument, any law. It was the truth, pure and undeniable. And the court finally listened. The courtroom was packed. The tension wound tight enough to snap. Reporters lined the back rows, pens poised, eyes narrowed. Colleagues from the bench sat like shadows in the gallery, watching the public redemption or fall of one of their own. Eleanor Mitchell took the stand without fanfare. No lawyer at her side, no legal shield between her and the storm. She wore a simple navy dress, hair pulled back, her expression calm but unflinching. The presiding judge, a senior justice from the state circuit, looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "Judge Mitchell, you understand the gravity of your presence here today." "I do," Eleanor said evenly. "You've been accused of unauthorized access of sealed custody files and of becoming personally involved with a litigant in a case you ruled on. Do you deny these actions?" "I don't." Her voice didn't waver. A rustle passed through the room. "Then why?" the judge asked slowly. "Should this court consider your actions anything less than a breach of judicial integrity?" Eleanor looked down at her clasped hands for a moment before lifting her eyes. "Because I followed the law at the expense of a child's well-being," she said. "And when I realized that, I couldn't pretend I didn't see it. I accessed the sealed file not for personal gain, not out of bias, but because the evidence I once trusted was incomplete, and I had the power to uncover the truth." She paused, breath steady. "Yes, I crossed a line, but it was a line between rules and conscience. I never intended to betray the court. I intended to honor the spirit of justice that got buried beneath polished arguments and professional appearances." "And your relationship with Mr. Reynolds?" Eleanor's gaze didn't falter. "We were strangers before that case, but witnessing the pain I helped cause broke something in me. Our connection came from truth, from guilt. Yes, from compassion, but never manipulation, never deceit." The room was quiet. "I won't apologize for protecting a child's heart," she finished. "Even if it cost me my seat, I would rather lose the robe than wear it while pretending that silence and correctness are the same as justice." The court reporter's fingers paused for a breath before continuing. The truth was now on record, and there was no taking it back. The courtroom was standing room only. Thomas sat at the edge of the bench, hands clasped tightly, Emma's music box tucked inside his coat pocket like a charm. Eleanor was 2 rows behind him, not in the robe, not at the stand, just a figure in a navy coat, calm and quiet, waiting like everyone else. Her suspension had already been drafted, pending the ruling. She hadn't fought it. She hadn't flinched. The judge adjusted his glasses, eyes scanning the papers before him, the room holding its collective breath. "In light of new evidence," he began, "including documented inconsistencies in the custodial parent's testimony, revised work and travel schedules, and the testimony of the child involved, this court finds sufficient cause to amend the original ruling." Thomas's heart stopped. "It is the court's decision that primary custody will remain with the mother," the judge said, and a sick, cold wave crept over Thomas's spine until the next words cut through. "But shared custody is hereby granted to the father, Thomas Reynolds. Visitation will no longer be supervised and will include alternating weekends, holidays, and a split summer schedule, effective immediately." Thomas exhaled so hard he nearly collapsed into himself. His lawyer gripped his shoulder. A tear slid down his cheek, and he didn't bother to wipe it. The judge continued, shifting his tone. "As for the matter of judicial conduct, the Oversight Board has reached its conclusion regarding former Judge Eleanor Mitchell. While her actions constituted a breach of procedure, her motives were determined to be free of personal or financial gain. She acted out of conscience, not corruption." Eleanor didn't move, not even when every eye turned to her. "As such," the judge said, "Miss Mitchell will be suspended from the bench for an undetermined period, subject to review, but she will retain her license to practice law. Disbarment is not warranted." The gavel fell. 1 strike. Final. It was done. Thomas turned around in the echo of it all and found Eleanor's eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't need to, because Emma was coming home, and they had both finally done something that felt like justice. The front door creaked open with the same soft groan it always had, but this time it sounded like music. Thomas stood in the entryway, keys still in his hand, heart hammering in his chest. As a small figure stepped inside behind him, backpack slung over one shoulder, stuffed rabbit in the other. Emma. She looked around the apartment like she was seeing it for the first time, even though every corner still held her fingerprints. Her eyes landed on the spot by the window where her beanbag chair used to sit, the scuff marks on the floor near the kitchen, where she danced barefoot in pajamas. "Is it really okay?" she asked, her voice no louder than a whisper. Thomas crouched down, opening his arms. "It's more than okay," he said. "You're home." She didn't hesitate. She dropped the bunny and launched forward, crashing into his chest with a hug so fierce it knocked the breath from him. He held her tightly, pressing his face into her hair. Letting her warmth and the smell of strawberry shampoo and crayons ground him in a moment he'd dreamed of for months. "I missed you every day," she whispered. "I know, baby," he said, voice breaking. "Me too." That afternoon, the apartment came alive again. The silence that had hung in the air like dust was replaced by laughter. Thomas found her favorite spoon in the back of the drawer. She found her missing sock behind the couch and declared it a miracle. They made pancakes for dinner, burnt on the edges just the way she liked. They danced in the kitchen while music played too loud from his old stereo. Later, she curled up in bed with Mr. Whiskers tucked under one arm and the music box playing softly on the nightstand. Thomas sat beside her until her eyes fluttered shut, her hands still curled around his thumb. He didn't move, not for a long time. The world outside kept spinning, the court, the press, the aftermath. They could wait, because tonight, his daughter was asleep in her bed, safe, loved, home. The new office was nothing like the chambers Eleanor had left behind. There were no marble floors, no polished plaques, no long corridors humming with quiet authority. Instead, the paint on the walls was fresh but imperfect. The windows overlooked a busy street corner, and the desk she sat behind was secondhand. Worn at the corners but sturdy, honest. A cardboard box sat open beside her, filled with handwritten thank you notes, news clippings from the Reynolds case, and one small envelope she still hadn't brought herself to throw away. Emma's letter. It lived in the top drawer now, not hidden, honored, above her on the wall. A new sign had just gone up. Simple lettering on brushed wood, the Bridgestone Foundation Legal Advocacy for Single Parents. Eleanor looked around the room, files already piling up, coffee machines sputtering in the corner. A young paralegal hunched over intake forms and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Purpose. She had traded in the bench for something less powerful on paper, but maybe more powerful in practice. Here, she didn't have to wait for cases to land on her docket. Here, she could choose to fight for the ones who couldn't afford high-powered lawyers or pristine records. People like Thomas, parents who loved fiercely but were written off because they didn't wear their love in court-approved formats. The door opened, and a woman stepped in with 2 small children in tow. Nervous, guarded, tired in the way only someone in the middle of a custody battle could be. "Are you the one who helps people?" she asked. Eleanor stood, offering a calm, steady smile that reached her eyes. "That's why I'm here." They sat down together, voices low, kids playing with crayons in the corner. As Eleanor listened, really listened, she took notes, asked questions, promised to fight not with a gavel this time, but with grit, compassion, and everything the law had taught her. Not about power, but about people. And when the woman left, hope flickering in her eyes, Eleanor Carter sat back and exhaled. She was no longer Judge Mitchell. She was something else now. And maybe, just maybe, something more. The late autumn air was crisp, the kind that hinted at winter but still clung to the last breath of warmth. Thomas stood outside the Bridgestone Foundation's modest office, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the small wooden sign above the door. He'd heard what Eleanor was doing, how she'd turned her fall from the bench into something that lifted others. It had made the news for a few days before fading back into the quiet corners where real change happened. But he hadn't reached out. Not yet. Until now. He stepped inside, the familiar jingle of a bell overhead drawing Eleanor's eyes up from a stack of case files. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she rose from her chair. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than the space deserved. Eleanor smiled, not the guarded kind she used to wear in court. This one was real. Tired, maybe, but open. Hey, yourself. They stood for a long second in the silence, the weight of their shared history hanging not like a burden, but like something earned. The courtroom, the verdict, the fallout. It was all behind them now. What remained was what had survived it. I thought I'd stop by, Thomas said. Emma wanted to bring you this. He handed her a folded piece of construction paper, covered in glitter and marker, a lopsided heart, and beneath it, in big block letters, "Thank you, Miss Eleanor." Inside was a drawing of the three of them, Thomas, Emma, and Eleanor, holding hands beneath a crooked sun. Eleanor blinked hard, emotion rising before she could hide it. She's really something, Thomas smiled. She is. They sat eventually, 2 cups of coffee between them, no court between them, no titles to uphold. I meant to say this sooner, Thomas said, his eyes steady. You didn't just help Emma. You gave me a piece of myself back, the part I thought I lost when they took her away. Eleanor looked down, fingers brushing the edge of the paper. And you gave me something too, a reason to believe in what comes after the robe. They didn't speak for a while after that. They didn't need to, because now they weren't judge and defendant. They were 2 people who had walked through fire and come out the other side, not unscathed, but standing, together. Westfield Park looked different now, though it hadn't changed much at all. Same old benches, same winding path lined with maple trees, their leaves beginning to turn golden crimson. Same playground where laughter echoed like a song across the grass. But for Thomas and Eleanor, everything had changed. They sat side by side on a worn wooden bench, a thermos of coffee between them, hands brushing once, then staying close, in front of them. Emma raced across the lawn with Mr. Whiskers tucked under one arm and a kite string in the other, her giggles rising like wind through the leaves. 1 year, Thomas said. Watching her, Eleanor nodded. Feels longer and shorter. She asks about you now, he added, a hint of amusement in his voice. Like you've always been part of the story. Eleanor smiled, her gaze fixed on Emma. Maybe I have, just not from the beginning. Thomas glanced at her, his voice quieter now. You ever miss it, the bench? She paused, considering. Sometimes. The structure? The weight of it, but not the distance. Not the way it asked me to feel less to serve more? He nodded slowly. And now, she said, watching the kite lift higher into the blue, I get to choose who I fight for. I get to feel everything. And I get to be here. He looked at her again. Really looked. Not as a judge, not even as the woman who once ruled against him, but as someone who chose to make things right. Eleanor reached for the thermos and poured a little more into his cup. You ever think about how strange it is, she asked. Everything we lost had to happen for us to find this. Thomas smiled, his eyes never leaving Emma. Not strange, he said. Just rare. The breeze picked up, carrying Emma's laughter back toward them, and with it, the quiet, undeniable truth that not all justice wears a robe. Sometimes it looks like a father's second chance, a child's safety, and a woman who followed her heart all the way to redemption. Eleanor leaned her head gently against his shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, there was peace. The gavel was gone, but the heart remained. Winter settled over Oak Ridge in a blanket of white, transforming the town into something out of a greeting card. Streetlights glowed softly through gently falling snow, and storefronts gleamed with holiday decorations. It was the kind of picturesque scene that belonged on mantels and in family albums, perfect, pristine, like nothing bad could touch it, at the edge of Main Street. Thomas stood outside Reynolds' Auto, locking up for the night. The shop was dark except for the small Christmas tree in the window, its multicolored lights blinking cheerfully against the glass. Business had been good lately. Word had spread about the mechanic who fought for his daughter and won not completely, but enough. People brought their cars to him now, not just for repairs, but because they wanted to be part of a story with a happy ending. He pulled his coat tighter against the cold and checked his watch. 7:30. Still time to pick up Emma's gift before heading home. She'd be waiting for him, probably already in pajamas, hot chocolate in hand, eager to continue their tradition of watching old Christmas movies until she fell asleep on the couch. It was their first Christmas together since the ruling, their first real holiday in nearly a year. He wanted everything to be perfect as he turned toward his truck. Headlights swept across the parking lot, illuminating the swirling snow. A sleek black sedan pulled in, its tires crunching on the fresh powder. Thomas squinted against the glare, his breath clouding in the frozen air. The car door opened, and Sarah Reynolds stepped out. She looked different from the last time he'd seen her in court. Thinner, her tailored coat hung a little loose around the shoulders, and her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. But her eyes were the same, determined, direct. A woman who knew exactly what she wanted. "Thomas," she said, voice carrying in the still night. "We need to talk." His jaw tightened. "Court says all communication goes through the lawyers." "This isn't about court." She took a step forward, her boots leaving sharp prints in the snow. "It's about Emma." Thomas felt his stomach drop. 1,000 possibilities flashed through his mind, each worse than the last. "What about her? Is she okay?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "She's fine. She's with Franklin. She paused, seeming to search for words that wouldn't come easily. "Can we go inside? Please, it's important." Thomas hesitated, keys heavy in his hand. The last time he'd been alone with Sarah, they'd been signing divorce papers. That had been 5 years ago, and nothing good had come from any conversation since. But she had said it was about Emma, and that was the one thing that could make him unlock the door and let her in. The garage office was small but warm, the ancient heater in the corner working overtime against the December chill. Thomas cleared a stack of invoices from the spare chair and gestured for Sarah to sit. She perched on the edge, looking out of place among the grease-stained manuals and tool calendars. "What's this about?" he asked, not bothering to take off his coat. Sarah removed her gloves slowly, methodically, the way she did everything. "I've been offered a position," she said. "Senior Vice President of Marketing. It's a significant step up." Thomas waited. This wasn't news that required a face-to-face visit on a snowy night. "It's in Chicago," she continued. "The company wants me to start next month." And there it was, the other shoe dropping with a thud that seemed to shake the small office. "You're moving," he said flatly, "and you want to take Emma." Sarah met his gaze. "That's what I came to talk about. I've been watching her these past few months, since the new arrangement. When she comes back from your place, she's different, lighter." Thomas said nothing, afraid that any word might break whatever strange moment this was. "I fought so hard for full custody," Sarah continued, her voice softer now. "I was convinced I knew what was best for her. The right neighborhood, the right schools, the right opportunities." She looked down at her hands. "But I didn't see what it was costing her." Outside, the snow fell harder, muffling the world beyond the windows. "I'm not taking her to Chicago," Sarah said finally. "I want to modify the custody agreement. I want her to stay here, with you." Thomas stared at her, certain he had misheard. "What? I'm giving you primary custody." The words seemed to cost her something, but her voice was steady. "I'll take the visitation schedule you have now. Weekends, holidays, summers. I can fly back for those." Why? It was all he could manage. Sarah's composure cracked just slightly, a glimpse of something raw beneath the polished surface. "Because for the first time since we split up, I've started to see Emma for who she is, not who I want her to be, and who she is your daughter." Thomas sat back, stunned. "Did Franklin put you up to this?" "No," she shook her head. "Though he agrees. He's the one who pointed out that she stops talking when I'm not around, that she only pretends to sleep in her room at our house but actually sleeps on the floor of the guest room because it's closer to the front door." Her voice caught. "Closer to the way home. To you." Thomas felt a tightness in his chest, not anger, not even vindication, just a deep, aching sadness for all the time lost. all the pain that could have been avoided. "I'm not perfect," Sarah said quietly, "but I do love her. And sometimes loving someone means admitting when you're wrong." The words hung in the air between them, fragile as the snowflakes outside. "I'll have the papers drawn up after the holidays," she continued, reaching for her gloves. "Unless you want to think about it." "No," Thomas said quickly. "No thinking needed." Sarah nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. "I thought so." She stood, pulling her coat closer. "One more thing. That judge who helped you, Mitchell." Thomas tensed slightly. "What about her? Tell her." Sarah paused. "Tell her she was right. About everything." And with that, she walked to the door, leaving Thomas alone with a future he had stopped daring to imagine. Eleanor's apartment glowed with the soft light of candles and a small tabletop Christmas tree. She moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, checking the oven, stirring a pot on the stove, the rich smell of tomato and herbs filling the space. It had been a long day at the foundation. 3 new cases, each more heartbreaking than the last. Parents fighting systems that weren't built to see them. Children caught in the crossfire. The work was hard, harder in some ways than the bench had ever been, but it filled a space inside her that had been empty for too long. She was just setting water to boil for pasta when her phone rang. Thomas's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," she answered, tucking the phone between her ear and shoulder as she measured out pasta. "I was just about to call you. Are we still on for Christmas Eve dinner with Emma? I found this recipe for where Sarah came to see me." He cut in, his voice tight with emotion. Eleanor froze. The pasta forgotten. "What happened? Is everything okay?" "She's moving to Chicago. New job." Eleanor's heart sank. "Oh, Thomas, can she do that?" "The custody agreement. She's giving me primary custody." The words landed like stones, heavy and impossible. Eleanor set down the measuring cup, gripping the counter for support. "She's what? Giving me Emma. Full time. She'll take the visitation schedule I have now." "Thomas, that's..." Eleanor couldn't find the words. "Why would she do that?" There was a pause filled with the sound of his breathing. "She said she finally saw Emma for who she is. Said she's happier with me. And..." Another pause. "She told me to tell you that you were right. About everything." Eleanor closed her eyes, a wave of emotion washing over her relief, vindication, and beneath it all, a quiet sense of wonder that sometimes, just sometimes, the world bent toward justice after all. "Are you okay?" she asked. A soft laugh came through the phone, shaky but real. "I don't know. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up." "It's real," she said gently. "You're getting your daughter back." "No," he corrected. "We're getting her back. This wouldn't have happened without you." The "we" lingered between them, small but significant. "Can you come over?" he asked suddenly. "I know it's late, but I don't want to be alone with this. It's too big." Eleanor glanced at the half-prepared dinner, the candles flickering on her table for one. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As she hung up, she realized her hands were trembling not from fear or worry, but from the strange, beautiful understanding that some battles, even when they seemed lost, found ways to be won in the end. The snow had stopped by the time Eleanor arrived at Thomas's apartment. Leaving the world hushed and pristine, she knocked softly, aware of the late hour and the possibility that Emma might be asleep. The door opened, and Thomas stood there, his expression a complex mix of disbelief and joy. Behind him, the apartment glowed with the warm light of a Christmas tree too large for the small space, its branches weighed down with a chaotic collection of handmade ornaments and mismatched lights. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," she replied, stepping inside and shedding her coat. "Where's Emma?" "Asleep. Finally, I couldn't tell her yet. It felt too big for tonight." Eleanor nodded. Understanding. Probably wise. Give yourself some time to process first. He led her to the small living room, where 2 mugs of something steaming waited on the coffee table. The apartment was neat but lived in, with school books stacked on the end table and a child's drawings taped to the refrigerator. It felt like a home, something her own place, for all its order and elegance, had never quite managed to be. "Hot chocolate," he said, nodding to the mugs. "Emma's recipe. Extra marshmallows are apparently critical to the structural integrity." Eleanor smiled, taking a seat on the worn sofa and reaching for a mug. "Sounds like she has her priorities straight." Thomas sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, but not so close as to presume. They had been doing this delicate dance for months now, friends. Certainly, but with an undercurrent of something neither had been brave enough to name. "I still can't believe it," he said, staring into his mug. "After everything, all the fighting, she just gives up. It doesn't make sense." "Maybe it does," Eleanor offered. "Maybe she finally saw what we all saw in that courtroom, that Emma belongs here, with you." "With us," he said quietly, meeting her eyes. "She asks about you every day. You know, when are we seeing Miss Eleanor? Did Miss Eleanor like my drawing? Do you think Miss Eleanor knows how to ice skate?" Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the hot chocolate. "I didn't know that. You've become part of her world. Part of," he hesitated, "part of our world." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. "I've been thinking," Thomas continued, setting down his mug, "about everything that's happened. How one ruling changed all our lives. Yours, mine, Emma's." Eleanor nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "It's strange how things work out. Is it, though?" He turned to face her fully. "Or was it supposed to be this way? You and me and Emma, were we supposed to find each other?" The question hung in the air, weighted with everything they hadn't said over the past year. All the glances. All the almost touches. All the moments when it would have been so easy to lean in, to cross that final line. But something, guilt, timing, circumstance, had held them back. "I don't know," Eleanor answered honestly. "I just know that I can't imagine my life without either of you in it now." Thomas reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "Then don't." The simplicity of it, the quiet certainty in his voice made her heart stutter. "Thomas, I'm not saying it wouldn't be complicated," he continued. "I'm just saying that maybe, after everything, we deserve something uncomplicated, something good." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, at the way his thumb traced gentle circles on her wrist. "And what would that something be?" He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and softened the lines of his face. "How about we start with you staying for Christmas Eve dinner tomorrow? Just the three of us. And then we see where it goes." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise, but it was an invitation to step into a future neither of them could have imagined a year ago. A future built not on rulings or laws, but on second chances and found family. "I'd like that," she said softly. Outside, the world was still, covered in snow and possibilities. Inside, in the warm glow of Christmas lights and newfound hope, Eleanor Mitchell and Thomas Reynolds sat side by side, hands intertwined, no longer judge and defendant, no longer divided by circumstance or separated by protocol, just two people who had found each other in the wreckage of what once was, ready to build something new from the pieces. Christmas Eve dawned bright and clear, the sun glinting off the snow-covered rooftops of Oak Ridge, in the Reynolds apartment. Emma woke early, as children do on days weighted with anticipation and magic. She padded into the living room in sock feet and flannel pajamas, expecting to find her father asleep on the couch where he often dozed after late nights at the garage. Instead, she found him in the kitchen, flour dusting his t-shirt, pancake batter waiting in a bowl. "Daddy," she asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Why are you up so early?" Thomas turned, a smile breaking across his face at the sight of her. "Because I have a surprise for you." Emma's eyes widened, immediately alert. "A Christmas surprise? Can I have it now, or do I have to wait till tomorrow?" He laughed, setting down the whisk and crouching to her level. "This one's too big to wrap. Pumpkin. So I guess you can have it now? She bounced a little on her toes, excitement radiating from her small frame. What is it? What is it? Thomas took a deep breath, searching for the words to explain something that would change her entire world. You know how you stay with me some days and with Mom other days? Emma nodded, her expression turning serious. Like the judge said, shared custody. Right. Well, your mom came to see me last night. She has a new job in Chicago, a really important one. Emma's face fell slightly. Are we moving to Chicago? No, sweetheart. Thomas reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You're staying here, with me, all the time. She stared at him, processing. All the time, like, I'll live here forever. Well, you'll still see Mom on weekends sometimes, and holidays, and summers. But yes, this will be your home, permanently. For a moment, Emma was perfectly still, her eyes wide and searching, as if looking for the catch. Then, with a cry that was half sob, half laugh, she launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking him off balance. Really, Daddy, really, really, he held her tight, breathing in the scent of sleep and strawberry shampoo. Really, really, she pulled back, her face alight with joy. Does Miss Eleanor know? Can we tell her? Can she come over? Can she help us decorate the tree more? Thomas laughed, his heart so full it threatened to burst. As a matter of fact, she's coming for dinner tonight, and I think she'd love to help with the tree, Emma squealed, twirling in a circle. This is the best Christmas ever. It really is, Thomas agreed, watching his daughter dance around the kitchen, her happiness filling every corner of the small apartment. Now, how about those pancake special occasion calls for extra chocolate chips? Don't you think? And blueberries, Emma declared, scrambling onto a chair. Both living dangerously, Thomas said with a wink. I like your style, as he turned back to the stove. He caught sight of his reflection in the window, a man he barely recognized. Not the weary, defeated father who had sat in that courtroom a year ago, but someone stronger, whole, a man who had fought for what mattered and, against all odds, had won. Outside, the world was bright with winter sunshine and the promise of new beginnings. Inside, the smell of pancakes filled the air, and a little girl's laughter echoed off the walls, the sweetest sound in a symphony of second chances. The Bridgestone Foundation office was quiet on Christmas Eve, most of the staff already gone for the holiday. Eleanor sat alone at her desk, finishing the last of her case notes before closing for the week. The foundation had grown in the past year, expanding from a one-woman operation to a team of 5 paralegals, a social worker, a grant writer, and Eleanor herself. They had taken on 37 cases, won 22, and changed the lives of countless children caught in the crossfire of broken relationships and rigid systems. It wasn't the bench, it wasn't the power or prestige she had once known, but it was something better, something real and raw and necessary, as she filed the last folder. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Emma knows, currently bouncing off walls. Mentioned your name approximately 47 times in last hour. Fair warning. Eleanor smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. She typed back, tell her I'm looking forward to it, bringing dessert. And yes, I checked it has chocolate. A moment later, you're a hero, see you at 6, dress warm. Apparently post-dinner sledding is now essential to the Christmas experience. Her words, not mine. Eleanor laughed, slipping her phone into her pocket and reaching for her coat. As she did, she caught sight of the small frame photo on her desk, Emma's drawing, the one she had given Eleanor months ago. The 3 of them, holding hands under a crooked sun. At the time, it had seemed like a child's wish, a fantasy of connection in a world determined to keep them apart. Now, it felt like a premonition, a glimpse of a future that was slowly, steadily, becoming reality. The foundation could wait. The cases would still be there after the holiday. But tonight was for family, the kind you choose, the kind that finds you when you least expect it. as Eleanor locked the office door behind her. Snow began to fall again, soft and gentle, covering the world in a clean, white blanket. A fresh start, a new page. She turned her face up to the sky, letting the flakes settle on her cheeks and eyelashes, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Home, not a place, but a feeling, a certainty that wherever Thomas and Emma were, that's where she belonged, with a smile that came from somewhere deep inside. Eleanor Mitchell stepped into the snowy evening, leaving behind the weight of the past and walking toward a future that once seemed impossible, a future built not on judgments, but on grace, not on rulings, but on love. The kind of future that could only be found when you were brave enough to leave the bench behind and step into the world with your heart wide open. The snow fell faster as evening settled over Oak Ridge, turning the streets into a winter wonderland. In the Reynolds apartment, the scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon filled every corner. The Christmas tree lights twinkled against the window, casting colorful shadows across the living room floor, where Emma sat surrounded by construction paper, scissors, and a tangle of ribbon. "Do you think she'll like it?" she asked, holding up a handmade ornament, a paper star covered in silver glitter with family written in careful letters across the front. Thomas looked up from setting the table, his heart catching at the earnestness in his daughter's expression. "She'll love it." It's beautiful." Emma beamed, adding a final touch of glue to secure the ribbon hanger. "I want to make everything perfect. It's our first Christmas together. All of us." The simple truth of her words struck him with unexpected force. She was right. It was their first Christmas not as judge and defendant, not as reluctant allies, but as something new, something that didn't have a name yet, but felt more right than anything had in years. A knock at the door sent Emma scrambling to her feet, glitter flying. "She's here! She's here!" Thomas caught her by the shoulders before she could fling open the door. "Whoa there, Speedy! Let's check who it is first. Remember safety, rule number 1. Emma nodded solemnly, though her excitement practically vibrated through her small frame. Thomas peered through the peephole, then smiled, stepping back to let his daughter do the honors. The door swung open to reveal Eleanor, snow-dusting her coat and hair, her arms full of packages wrapped in silver paper and tied with blue ribbon. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes bright, and something in Thomas's chest tightened at the sight of her, this woman who had changed everything, standing on his threshold like she belonged there. "Miss Eleanor," Emma cried, launching herself forward for a hug that nearly toppled the precarious stack of gifts. Eleanor laughed, somehow managing to keep her balance and return the embrace with one arm. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Something smells amazing in there. Daddy made turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes and green bean casserole and cranberry sauce, the kind with whole berries, not the jellied kind, and I helped with the rolls, but they got a little burnt on the bottom. But Daddy says that's how you know they're homemade and—" "Breathe, Em," Thomas cut in, gently extracting Eleanor from his daughter's grip and relieving her of the packages. Their hands brushed in the exchange, a small point of warmth in the winter chill. "Let Miss Eleanor at least get through the door before you give her the entire menu." Eleanor stepped inside, unwinding her scarf and shrugging off her coat. Beneath it, she wore a simple emerald green dress, casual but elegant, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual knot. She looked different, softer, less like the judge who had once sat in judgment, and more like a woman coming home. "Miss Eleanor," Emma said, tugging at her hand, "did you know I get to stay with Daddy forever now? Well, not forever, because I'll go to college someday. But you know what I mean. Mom's moving to Chicago, and I get to live here all the time." Eleanor knelt down, meeting Emma at eye level. "I did hear that. How do you feel about it?" Emma's expression turned serious, thoughtful beyond her years. "Happy, but also a little sad, because I'll miss Mom, but mostly happy, because—" She glanced back at her father, then leaned in close, as if sharing a secret. "Because Daddy needs me, and I need him." Eleanor's eyes softened, and she brushed a strand of hair from Emma's face in a gesture so maternal, so natural that Thomas felt his throat tighten. That's a very wise way to look at it. And you know what? It's okay to feel both things at once, happy and sad. That's how we know something really matters to us. Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. I made you something for the tree, come see. As she darted back to her craft station, Thomas stepped closer to Eleanor, his voice low. Thank you for coming, for everything. She looked up at him, her eyes holding his with a warmth that made the room feel suddenly too small. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. For a moment, they stood there, the air between them charged with everything still unsaid. Then Emma was back, thrusting the glittery star ornament into Eleanor's hands. And the moment passed, but the feeling remained, a quiet certainty that settled over the small apartment like the snow outside. This was right. This was where they all belonged. Family. Eleanor read from the ornament, her voice catching slightly. It's perfect. Emma. Absolutely perfect. And as they moved toward the table, the three of them together in the warm glow of Christmas lights and newfound hope, Eleanor Mitchell finally understood what she had been searching for all along, not justice, not redemption, but a family built from the broken pieces of what came before. A home not made of walls, but of hearts brave enough to try again. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in possibilities. Inside, a judge who had lost her robe, a father who had found his voice, and a little girl who had brought them together sat down to Christmas Eve dinner, their laughter filling the small apartment with the kind of music no courtroom could ever contain. The gavel was gone, but in its place was something far more powerful, a love born not from rules or rulings, but from the simple, stunning truth that sometimes the heart knows better than the law ever could.